Edwin Montagu and Chelmsford, the Secretary of State for India and Viceroy respectively, announced a scheme of constitutional changes for India which came to be known as the Indian Councils Act of 1919. The act enlarged the provincial legislative councils with elected majorities. The governments in the provinces were given more share in the administration under diarchy. Under this arrangement, all important subjects like law and order and finance reserved for the white men and were directly under the control of the governors. Other subjects such as health, education, and local self-government were transferred to elected Indian representatives. Ministers holding transferred subjects were responsible to the legislature, but those in charge of reserved subjects were not further. Uh, the governor of the province could overrule the ministers under special veto powers, thus making a mockery of the entire scheme. Ministers holding transferred subjects were responsible to the legislatures. Uh, uh, but those in charge of reserved subjects were not further. The governor of the province could overrule the ministers under special veto powers, thus making a mockery of the entire scheme. The part dealing with the central legislature in the act created two houses of legislature bicameral. The Central Legislative Assembly was to have 41 nominated members out of a total of 144. The upper house is known as the Council of States was to have 60 members, of whom 26 were to be nominated. Both the both the houses had no control over the Governor General and his Executive Council, but the central government had full control over the provincial governments. As a result, power was concentrated in the hands of the European English authorities. Right to vote also continued to be restricted. The public spirited men of India who had extended unconditional support to the war efforts of Britain as they expected more. The scheme, when announced in 1918, came to be criticized throughout the India. Throughout India, the Indian National Congress met in a special session in Bombay in August 1918 to discuss the scheme. The Congress termed the scheme disappointing and unsatisfactory. The colonial government followed a carrot and stick policy. There was a group of moderate and liberal leaders wanted to try and work the reforms led by Surendranath Banerjee. They opposed the majority option and left the Congress to form their own party, which came to be called the Indian Liberal Federation. The non-Brahmin movement, the hierarchical Indian society and the contradictions within found expression in the form of caste associations and movements to question the dominance of higher castes. Higher castes were also controlling the factors of production, and thus the middle and lower castes were dependent on them for livelihood. Liberalism and humanism, which influenced and accompanied the socio-religious reform movements of the 19th century, had affected the society and still did. The symptoms of their awakening were already visible in the last quarter of the 19th century. The Nama Sudra movement in the Bengal and eastern India, the Adi Dharma movement in northwestern India, the Satya Sodhak movement in the western India, and the Dravidian movements in South India had emerged and raised their voice by the turn of the century. They were all led by non-Brahmin leaders who questioned the supremacy of the Brahmins and other superior castes. It manifested itself through Jyotirao Phule's book of 1872 titled Gulamgiri. His organization, Satya Sodhak Samaj, underscored the necessity to relieve the lower caste from the tyranny of the Brahmanism and the exploitative scriptures. The control administrators and the educational institutions that were established indirectly facilitated their origin. Added to the growing influence of Brahmin upper caste men in the colonial times, in whatever opportunity was open to natives, the colonial government published census reports once a decade. These reports classified castes on the basis of social precedence as recognized by native public opinion. The census were a source of conflict between the castes. There were claims and counterclaims as the leaders of caste organizations fought for preeminence and many started new caste associations. These attempts were further helped by the emerging political scenario. Leading members of caste realized that it was important to mobilize their castes in struggles for social recognition. More than the recognition, many of them, as years passed by, started providing for education of their caste breadthen and help the educated youth in getting jobs. In the meantime, introduction of electoral politics from the 1880s gave a fillip to such organizations. The outcome of all this was expression of socio-economic tensions. The trends emerged out of the non-Brahmin movements. One was what is called as process of transcretization of the lower caste, and the second was a radical pro-poor and progressive peasant labor movements. While the northern and eastern caste movements by large were Sanskritic, the western and the southern movements split and absorbed by the rising nationalist and Dravidian left movements. However, all these movements were critical of what they called as Brahmin domination and attacked their monopoly and pleaded with the government through their associations for justice. In Bombay and Madras presidencies, clear-cut Brahmin monopoly in the government services and general cultural arena led to non-Brahmin politics. The pattern of the movement in South was a little different. The Brahmin monopoly was quite formidable, as with only 3.2% of the population, they had 72% of all the graduates. They came to be challenged by educated and trading community members of the non-Brahmin caste. They were elitist in the beginning, and their challenge was articulated by the non-Brahmin manifesto issued at the end of 1916. They asserted that they formed the bulk of the taxpayers, including a large majority of the zamindars, landlords, and agriculturists, yet they received no benefits from the state. The colonial government made use of the genuine grievances of the non-Brahmins to divide and rule India. This was true with the Brahmanetra Parishad and the Justice Party of Bombay and Madras presidencies, respectively, at least till 1930. Both the regions had some socially radical possibilities, as could be seen in the emergence of a radical Dalit Bahujan movement under the leadership of Dr. Ambedkar and the self-respect movement under the leadership of Periyar Ramaswamy. The nationalists were able to understand the liberal democratic content in the awakening among the lower strata of the Indian society, while a section of the nationalists simply ignored the stirrings. A majority of them, and particularly the so-called extremist radicals, were opposed to the movements. A few of them were even hostile and labeled them as stooges of the British, anti-national, etc. The early leaders of the non-Brahmin movement were in fact using the same tactics as the earlier nationalist leaders in dealing with the colonial government. Non-cooperation movement, Rowlatt Act. It was part of the British policy to rally the moderates and isolate the extremists. That the Indian Councils Act 1919 and the Rowlatt Act of the same year were promulgated. Throughout the World War, the repressive measures against the terrorists and revolutions had continued. Many of them were hanged and imprisoned. Despite every elected member of the central um, some, and every member of the central legislature opposing the bill, the government passed the Rowlatt Act in March 1919. This act empowered the government to imprison any person without trial. Gandhi and his associates were shocked. It was the Satyagraha Sabha founded by Gandhi which pledged to disobey the act first, in the place of the old agitational methods such as meetings, boycott of foreign cloth and schools, picketing of toddy shops, petitions and demonstrations. A novel method was adopted. Now Satyagraha was the weapon to be used with the wider participation of labor, artisan and peasant masses. The symbol of this change was to be Khadi, which soon became the uniform of nationalists. India's Swaraj would be a reality only when the masses awakened and became active in political work. Almost the entire country was electrified when Gandhi called upon the people to observe Hartal in March-April 1919 against the Rowlatt Act. He combined it with the Khilafat issue which brought together Hindus and Muslims. Jallianwala Bagh. On 13th April 1919, in Amritsar town, in the Jallianwala enclave, that the most heinous of political crimes was perpetrated by an unarmed mass of people by the British regime. More than 2,000 people had assembled at the venue to peacefully protest against the arrest of their leaders Satyapal and Saifuddin Kichlu. Michael O'Dwyer was the Lieutenant Governor of Punjab and the military commander was General Reginald Dyer. They decided to demonstrate their power and teach a lesson to the dissenters. The part where the gathering was held had only one narrow entrance. Dyer ordered firing on the trapped crowd with machine guns and rifles till the ammunition was exhausted. While the official figures of the dead was only about 379, the real number was over 1,000. Martial law was imposed all over Punjab and people were subject to untold indignities. The entire country was horrified at the brutalities. In Bombay, Kolkata, Delhi, Lahore, there were widespread protests against the Rowlatt Act where the protesters were fired upon. There was violence in many towns and cities protesting against the brutalities. Many celebrities renounced their titles, of whom Rabindranath Tagore was one. Rabindranath Tagore renounced his knighthood immediately after the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. In his protest letter to the Viceroy on May 31, 1919, Tagore wrote, "The time has come when the badge of honor makes our shame glaring in their incongruous context of humiliation, and I for my part wish to stand shorn of all special distinctions by the side of those of my countrymen who, for their so-called insignificance, are liable to suffer degradation not fit for human beings." The two immediate causes responsible for launching the non-cooperation movement were the Khilafat and the Punjab wrongs, where the Khilafat issue related to the position of the Turkish Sultan vis-a-vis the holy places of Islam. The Punjab issue related to the exoneration of the perpetrators of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, while the control over the holy places of Islam was taken over by the non-Islamic powers against the assurance of the British rulers. The British courts of inquiry totally exonerated Reginald Dyer and Michael O'Dwyer of the crime perpetrated at the Jallianwala Bagh. A Sikh teenager was raised at Khalsa orphanage named Udham Singh for the happening in his own eyes. To avenge the killings of Jallianwala Bagh on 30th March 1940, he assassinated Michael O'Dwyer in Caxton Hall of London. Udham Singh was hanged at the Pentonville Jail, London. Gandhi and the Congress, who were bent upon Hindu-Muslim unity, now stood by their Muslim compatriots who were betrayed by the British regime. The Ali brothers Shukla and Muhammad and Maulana Abul Kalam Azad were the prime movers in the Khilafat movement.